Well, as some of you know, today is Super Bowl Sunday. And the Packers really should have been playing in this game. They were the better team, but for a variety of reasons, none of which that we're going to go into this morning, they lost their game to Seattle. And so in about 7 hours, Seattle is going to be playing the New England Patriots. But it should have been the Packers playing the New England Patriots. Now I confess to you that after the Packer loss to Seattle, I was in funk. I really was. I was down for 2 or 3 days. I just could not believe, that they had lost to Seattle. But after a few days, I bounced back from my disappointment. And that's usually the case. Yeah. After a disappointment, you usually bounce back. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't bounce back from disappointment. And when that happens, you find yourself slipping from disappointment into discouragement. Disappointment is usually temporary, but discouragement is persistent. And when you're in discouragement, that is not good, because discouragement takes you to a place where you do not want to go. So what I want to do this morning is I want to share with you some things that can help you keep from becoming discouraged, or if you are discouraged, some things that can help you move out of discouragement. Having said that, let me share with you now some points to consider. If you don't want to be discouraged, or if you are discouraged and you want to get out of discouragement, the very first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you're getting enough rest for renewal. It's really hard to bounce out of discouragement if you're not rested, because that just kind of compounds the factor. So rest is the very first thing that you need if you want to keep from being discouraged or bounce out of discouragement. And this is something that we saw Jesus do time and time again during his ministry. Whenever Jesus would face disappointment, and usually that's centered around butting heads with the religious establishment, what would Jesus do? Time and time again we find Jesus breaking away after experiencing disappointment with the religious establishment. He'd break away, he'd find rest. He'd go up into the mountains, seek out a lonely place, but he would rest. He would kind of recharge his batteries. And with the recharging of his batteries, it would place him in a better position to keep dealing with disappointment from time to time and not be discouraged. So the first suggestion, rest. Rest brings about renewal, and renewal helps us deal with discouragement. The second thing that I would share with you to deal with discouragement is to remember that your situation is only temporary. Whatever has brought disappointment to you and is maybe pushing you towards discouragement, recognize that whatever that initial event was, it's only temporary. The Packer game, only temporary. A problem with health, usually only temporary. A situation at school, usually only temporary. A situation at work, usually it's only temporary. A problem child in the home, usually it's only temporary. When we recognize that whatever we're dealing with is only temporary, it gives us a little light at the end of the tunnel. And that births hope. And hope also helps us counteract discouragement. I think all of you know, for the most part, that I'm the police chaplain for our Delvin Police Department. And as the police chaplain, volunteer police chaplain, I do a lot of things for the department. And one of the things is call on some of our officers when they have health situations. And so this past week I was visiting one of our officers who had knee replacement surgery. And so I was at his home visiting with him, and I found him to be in good spirits. And I think one of the reasons why he was in good spirits is because he did come through the surgery successfully, and he was now involved in the physical therapy, but he realized that his situation was temporary. He's not going to be in physical therapy forever and ever. He realized that in time he'll work his way through physical therapy, and he'll get back in his patrol car, and he'll be patrolling the streets once again. When you recognize that whatever you're dealing with is temporary, it gives you that light at the end of the tunnel. And that light keeps you just a little bit from becoming discouraged. A third suggestion is to call upon God and utilize your faith and the resources of your faith to keep you from falling into discouragement, or to help get you out of discouragement. And this is something that we saw Daniel do in the scripture that I read for you. Daniel's a young man. He's got a lot of gifts, a lot of graces, a lot of talents. He's taken as a prisoner of war by the Babylonian army and brought back to Babylon. Daniel had to leave his family, his home, his city of Jerusalem, his country of Judah. And when Daniel left, he sensed he would never, ever return. Now think about that for a moment. You're taken as a prisoner of war, and you know you will never see your family again. You will never get to go back home again. That was Daniel's situation. Disappointment, yes. And you wouldn't blame Daniel if he would become very depressed and discouraged in that situation. But Daniel doesn't become discouraged. I'm sure he was disappointed at first, but he doesn't become discouraged. Now, how did that be for Daniel? Well, it took place because Daniel called upon God and drew upon his faith traditions. The first thing Daniel realizes that he's in this foreign land, and they're giving him all this foreign food, non-kosher food, and he doesn't want to eat it because as a Jew, he believes if he eats this non-kosher food, it will defile him, make him unclean as a Jew, and he doesn't want that. So he resists eating the food that the king's servants are bringing. Of course, the guard over Daniel's concerned because Daniel's not to be growing weaker. He's still getting stronger because he's going to be used by the king in service. And so he wants to make sure that Daniel's well fed and well nourished and doesn't want him to look sick or weakly. And then Daniel and the guard come to this arrangement of trying just vegetables, and Daniel looks just to be as healthy as everyone else, and so he's allowed not to eat the unkosher food that was being brought to him. He drew upon his faith, called upon God, drew upon his traditions of his faith, like some of the eating rituals, and that strengthened Daniel. And for those who are studying the book of Daniel, they'll quickly realize, as we come through that study, that Daniel never would become discouraged. At least in the book, we don't see that. Because he drew upon his faith, he drew upon God. The psalmist said, "Cast your cares upon the Lord, and he will carry you." And there's truth to that. When we call upon God, when we draw upon our faith and the traditions and rituals of our faith, strength comes. Strength that enables us not to become discouraged. So call upon God. It will help to fight discouragement in your life. Fourth suggestion, talk about your feelings. Talk about if you've been disappointed and you're feeling down, you got to get that out. So you talk about it with others, and you vent, and you share. And I think that's one of the things that helped Packer Nation from falling into a total depressed funk, is that after the game, thousands of Packer fans were talking out their feelings. And the radio shows, the radio talk shows were inundated with people calling and wanted to talk about the Packer game and why they lost, and Coach McCarthy and all that kind of stuff. Talking about your feelings helps put you in a better place. And as you're in a better place, then you are able to deal with the disappointment in appropriate ways without becoming discouraged. I know talking about the Packer loss really helped me. As I said, I was in the funk. But after talking to my sister and my friends and responding to emails and talking to my son Paul, I got everything off my chest. And I was ready to move on without becoming discouraged. A fifth suggestion, put things into perspective. Put things into perspective. When you put things into perspective, again, it puts you in a better place. I mean, the Packer loss, for some of us, was huge. I mean, it was huge. But when you take a look at the Packer game and compare that by putting it into perspective against what's going on in Iraq or Afghanistan, the Packer game is infinitesimally small. Amen? Amen. I mean, when you take that Packer game, the disappointment there, and put that up against, families grieving the loss of their loved ones at that recent airline crash, or what took place in France with terrorism there, and all the families who lost loved ones there. Again, this is small, really small. When you take your disappointment and hold that up against an Iraqi war veteran coming home without his legs because he got hit by that mine, again, it's small. So whatever has disappointed you and is pushing you into discouragement, look at it from the bigger scheme of things. Put it into perspective. The fact is, failed the test. It's big, but when you look at that compared to the loss of a loved one, pretty small. Putting things in perspective helps put us in a better place to keep from becoming discouraged. Last suggestion is recognize discouragement is a choice. Hear that. You choose discouragement. So don't choose it. Don't choose it. Dr. Charles Stanley, who's a Baptist preacher, many of you know his name, said this: disappointment is inevitable, but to become discouraged, that's a choice we make. Disappointment is inevitable, but to become discouraged is a choice that we make, and it is. So don't choose to be discouraged. Choose to be positive. Choose to be strong. Choose to be courageous. It's a choice. Disappointment happens all the time to all of us. And sometimes we bounce back and move on without thinking about that disappointment much anymore. But sometimes whatever has disappointed us can push us towards discouragement, and that's a valley we don't want to walk through. So remember the suggestions that I've given you this morning, to either keep from becoming discouraged or to bounce out of discouragement. Remember rest. Remember things are only temporary. Remember to call upon God in your faith traditions. Remember to talk about your feelings. Remember, put things into perspective. And finally, remember, discouragement is a choice. These suggestions work. And if you put them into practice, you'll move from disappointment back into life without dealing with discouragement.